Monday morning, and we are back with the ELF live recap show after what has been a historic weekend in the European League of Football. Felt like Christmas all weekend. Matt, what's going on, man? How you doing? How do you feel about this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, heart rate constantly up high, upsets here, things going on, me shouting at the TV for multiple hours over the weekend. Yeah, big
We
one.
we had some good games. We had 8 games this weekend, 7 of which were fantastic football games that really just showed what the ELF is all about. We had one kind of a dud game, the one game that I was at, the Serge Milano game, and we'll get into all of these, but for the most part, just fantastic, high competition football games. Check these out right here. And everybody in the chat, welcome. Feel free to chime in and chit chat with Matt and myself. And Matt, shall we dive into these games?
Let's get into it. Let's go.
Let's
It's gonna be another reliving.
Yeah. All right.
Craziness.
First one, the Western Conference showdown. 2 Western Conference heavyweights. The Rhine Fire coming off the disappointing loss to the Bravos the previous week, playing the Paris Musketeers. Walk me through it, Matt. How'd you feel? What we got?
I mean, we can't really not mention Glenn. 206 yards was absolutely incredible all game. Without him, it would have been tough. But both of us were kind of, I think we went either side of this one because Paris were looking extremely threatening the first couple of weeks. Ryan have, taken a bit of a step down with injuries and in overall play. But oh my God, what a game. There's turnovers here, turnovers there. Big plays, big chunk plays by Glenn. And I think the thing that goes quite under the radar when people were talking about this game in the aftermath was Ryan did a really good job of driving down the field and just getting points when they could. Like they didn't rush drives. They didn't finish drives with interception. There was a couple, obviously, early on. They just chipped away at Paris and eventually got the points they needed to, and then Paris couldn't come through with that final drive. That final drive, 90 seconds left. They got a good field. Austin Mitchell's punt return was called back, which is already a storyline in its own right. And then one play and an interception. I don't understand what went into that decision. I feel like they had enough time. They could have got out. They could have got the spike. They could have had a few plays. The game was so in Paris's hands, and I don't really get how they messed it up. To be frank, it was quite a questionable play call at the end.
Yeah, difficult, kind of difficult one to swallow if you're a Musketeers fan because it was well within reach. The Fire, like we talked about, man, they're very beatable this year, or at least in their current state. Their offense just really not clicking. Glenn was their entire offense. What'd you say he ended up with? 206 yards on 31 carries and 50 more yards through the air. So it was really just all Glenn. Not much going on for Jadrian in the passing game, just 12 for 13 for 111 yards. So it's not the Rhine Fire offense that we've seen of the past. Matt, do you think that the Rhine Fire will return to kind of their former glory of 2023 when they get through kind of this injury wave, or is it just a completely new era where they're not just the outright top dog anymore?
I mean, the quality of football every team pretty much has gone up. So it's always going to be quite difficult to stay on top. They were 16-0, best offense we've ever seen, one of the best defense we've ever seen. For Fire and the Fire are doing this. They're still 3-1 right now. They're 19-1 over the last however long. They're still one of the top dogs in this race, and we're already kind of saying about is it a new era? Is it this? Is it that? Are they going to be the same team they used to be? But they're still not dead. The Glenn's still an incredible running back, one of the best in Europe. The receivers made clutch plays down the stretch on those final drives. The defense held strong. They stopped a very successful Musketeers rushing offense, and they kind of neutralized it. Edwards was the leading rusher with 31 yards on the ground. Ugman only got 30. They neutralized that, and that's one of the scariest offenses in the league. So I don't think they're finished. I absolutely don't think they're finished. I do think they're still one of the contenders for the championship. They just need to show up a few things. They've got a few more defensive pieces in. Haaland was back. He's still very clearly on a less involved role. He's probably still
Right.
coming back from those injuries and rehabbing and whatnot. But they're still absolutely a contender. I don't think they're in much trouble. Jadrian needs to pick up a bit of steam. I'm sure he'll be fine. He's a former MVP. It's not like we know that he can't do it. He's been excellent last year, and he showed those flashes in the previous game. But yeah, man, Glenn, he's the engine of that team. He really is. And Paris were the team I thought would be the most competitive with Ryan. Hasn't Madrid ended up getting the win last week, so it's not necessarily the overall theme. But they've only played really good teams, and they're still 3-1.
It's a great point.
Yeah, they haven't played any of these dud teams that we don't really think they're going to lose against. They've only played Galaxy. They've only played Madrid. They played Paris. So these are incredible teams, and they're still 3-1.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's the thing. And somebody even said it on Twitter. Somebody came after the power rankings, our power rankings included, where I think we both had the Rhine Fire at 5. And I actually responded to them and I said, I think you might have a point there. I think we kind of overreacted a little bit from the Madrid loss. It was very exciting league-wise to see the Rhine Fire kind of fall off the throne and to see some new fresh competition up there at the top. But I do think just what you said, man, the Fire are still an elite team, still a championship contender. Here we see Glenn just breaking off one of his run. Glenn is just an absolute perfect superstar for the league. I mean, he just does it on the field. He's got the off-field personality, European player. He just does it all, man. And
he's a Brit. So I'm happy that
which you love.
Two of the best running backs in the leagues are Brits at the moment. So I'm absolutely ecstatic with that result.
There we go. A little bit of national pride for the British running backs. And yeah, man, this one obviously came down to the wire, but Paris still fantastic team, still probably a top 3-4 team. And these teams will play each other again later in the season, of course, as Western Conference foes, which will be, man, that'll be exciting to think. What do you think about the rematch of this, man? Do you think they split them?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think that, Fire got a one-up. Fire have historically been great against Paris. But Zach Edwards has also been historically great against Ryan. So it kind of goes even. Jamal made that great point. So it kind of goes either way. I'm going to favor Ryan, of course, after the win, because momentum is massive. It really is make or break.
True.
And when Glenn's been that good, it's kind of hard to bet against him. As I said on some of the group chats that we're in, death, taxes, and do not bet against the Ryan Fire. These are 3 guarantees in life that you cannot, go against. But Paris need to figure out that offense. That last drive really was a concern. And it was a French player, Anthony Anderson, ended up killing the French hopes in that game. The irony is not lost.
Irony. Killing the French in the end there. And this one ends at 19-14 for the Rhine Fire. But what a way to kick off the weekend, man. What a way to kick off the weekend. And just that Western Conference is insane. I mean, if you had to pick today, Matt, who wins that conference?
I'm still going to go with Ryan.
Okay.
But, you could argue Paris, you could argue Madrid, you could even, maybe the Galaxy come back. I don't think they will, but, some people were surely going to argue it, but I'm going to still go with Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, we can't forget about the Galaxy too, and we'll talk about them. They did pick up their first win of the year, but yeah, this was just a fantastic way to kick off the weekends. Rhine Fire pulling it out, defeating the Paris Musketeers. All right, our next one, another Western Conference showdown. This one, Matt, I actually ended up commentating last minute, filling in emergency. I came in to commentate this game. But first, I'd like to get your thoughts and breakdown on this showdown.
I mean, I think someone in Wroclaw is going to be, a little bit hot under the collar. That was, I'm just saying, Duncan was really good. He looked accurate. He got 300 yards on passing. He got 1 rushing, 1 passing touchdown, spreading the ball out. He looked confident. He looked comfortable. This was the Duncan we saw in week 1. And he looked a lot better in this one. We have Dwayne Obi. We just talked about British running backs. He got 123 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, and was also impactful on the passing game. Madrid, firing on all cylinders. They've not skipped a beat. They lost their starting quarterback, brought in a new quarterback who's just come from a different team and has had troubles over there. And they looked great. It's kind of incredible how good they looked. The passing game was on fire. The running game was on fire. Defensively, they had a couple issues. That big run by Jared Alman. But then they got straight back into it. It was what, 27-24 at one point.
Right.
Willie Patterson takes that jet immediately, touchdown.
Yeah.
And then they get the ball back as Weed throws it long immediately, interception by Luke Glenner. Like, they've just got these chunk plays in these close games that can really separate them away from like the pretenders and contenders. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and their defense is so good. Janelle Pelly, another Brit,
Hey.
got a sack on that play. Jalen Embry is one of the best cornerbacks in the league this year. He got that interception just towards the end of the second quarter. Like, they are, as we've talked about this before, how cohesive they are as a team and how bonded they look, and just the pride within their organization. They look so good. And then with Cologne, they coming off a bye week. They do still have that high rush and intensity, and they can score a lot of points in bursts, but they just couldn't get over the hill.
Right.
They were so close at so many points, and they just kind of lacked that big plays we talked about that Madrid had.
Yeah, exactly. Here in the chat, Mark Wilson, actually, we talked about. Oh, we got a little delay there. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we go. In the chat here, Mark Wilson, you mentioned Stephen Duncan, obviously was with the Panthers. It got released and then picked up by the Bravos this week. Mark Wilson says it's Wrocław's offensive line that was Duncan's downfall in Poland. And I think there might be some truth to that, especially seeing his performance here in Madrid in this first week, and then what happened with Wrocław this week without Duncan. But yeah, man, Stephen Duncan was the big story in this one for me. He looked great. He made good decisions. Obviously, here we see Dwayne Obi on one of his touchdown runs. He's fantastic. Just a bruiser, man. I mean, just at that offensive backfield with Duncan and Obi, those are some big boys. But I was also, and you touched on a little bit, Cologne, we cannot overlook them because they did stay in the game almost the whole time. And it was 24-27 at one point. But they just are not consistent enough to bring one home like that. But to stay in the game against the Madrid Bravos, a team that many of us consider a top 4, top 5 team in the league, it was impressive. It is a little unfortunate for a team like Cologne to be in the Western Conference with like kind of 3 or 4 juggernaut heavyweight teams. I'd be so curious to see how Cologne's season would go if they were in the Central Conference. Yes. And if they were to be able to have a couple of more of those matchups, and even to see Cologne go against, and we'll talk about these teams, the Ravens and the Raiders, which was also a good game. But yeah, Jared Alman, of course, like just ripped off a few big runs. The big one was the 80-something yarder. And Isaiah Weed, he showed flashes, man. He shows flashes, but then he also shows flashes of not great decisions and inconsistency. But this one is just end up being all Madrid Bravos. Yeah, man, what do you think of that? What do you think of Isaiah Weed as a quarterback?
Yeah, I was watching some of the tape back today and yesterday, and I tweeted about how mobile quarterbacks have not really done like the championship level play in the ELF. We look at the champion Sullivan, I wouldn't class him as a dual threat. Same with Jadrian, same with Hennessy.
Right.
These guys aren't necessarily, or even Chad Jeffries as well. These guys aren't typical mobile dual threat guys. They moved around in the pocket more and then picked their spots. We've seen the same with Javarian Smith and Isaiah Weed, where they're mobile quarterbacks, but they are kind of lacking a little bit in the pass game. Right. Isaiah Weed, I said last week, they need to kind of take that step up in the passing game. But we saw 2 more interceptions here, 50% accuracy, which isn't very good for a quarterback. We haven't seen Weddington, a receiver, really burst out how I expected him to. Like, it's just kind of a bit flat, I feel, on the passing game.
It's
run game, they're all cylinders.
Yeah, of course.
Passing game, not really much really cooking.
It's an interesting point because this was kind of the culture in the NFL for a while where dual threat quarterbacks were not having as much sustainable success. But then sort of the tide turned and you get some guys that aren't necessarily, run first quarterbacks or anything like that, but somebody that's a little more mobile like Patrick Mahomes, of course, or like Lamar Jackson. And these are guys who end up having a lot of success in recent years. I wonder if the dual threat quarterback will have a big future in the ELF or will be more traditional pocket passers. One dual threat, though, that did, and we'll talk about him, N'Kosi Perry, came in and had his first ever ELF game. But yeah, not getting it done with a 50% completion rating in this league.
No, it's going to be hard to really make teams respect that. If they're going to stack the box, they're going to have a 5-line or they're going to put safety at linebacker, because you can't really scare them with the pass.
Right.
Weed has the arm. His offensive line is kind of okay. Like, it's not the worst, it's not the best. But when you can show something on a passing game, defenses are just going to play into the strengths, and that's the run game. They're going to stop Jared Allen, who is a former Rookie of the Year, and he had that big runoff, so we know that he can do it.
Right.
But Weed has just got to elevate his passing game. 169 yards isn't very much production, even if he's going under 50%. But spreading the rock out a lot, which we didn't see, it would be a different story. But it's just they need a second option. They cannot just rely on the run game to win them games, because teams are going to get wise to it very, very quickly. And we saw that with Madrid.
Absolutely, man. So this one ended up being 35-24 in favor of the Bravos. Cologne really did show some flashes there, kept it close for a long time, but the Bravos just proved to be a little bit too deep and too powerful, and they are sitting at 3-0, the new franchise, Madrid Bravos. Who would have thought? I think some people, but I think some people are a little bit surprised that the Bravos are sitting there at the top of the Western Conference and near the top of the league. All right. 2 games in the West we've just touched on, and now we're headed east, Matt. This one was wild. Generali Arena in Vienna. Berlin Thunder versus the Vienna Vikings. Vienna Vikings were in their military salute to service uniforms, which looked pretty damn cool. This one was a fire game. Talk to me about this one, Matt.
Another crazy game that could have kind of went either way. Berlin had a lead for a large chunk of the game, and they kind of fumbled it away. But then the Vikings also had some moments where they looked like they were going to fumble it away. Multiple fumbles on offense, an interception by Epler. But Epler did look really quite good at some parts of that game. Like, he looked like an elite quarterback at stretches. 308 yards for him, 3 touchdowns, a couple rushing yards to add to it as well. He looked really, really good. Sullivan looked really, really good, but same breath, a couple of turnovers. That's the thing. Passing game, Aaron Jackson, we know how good he is. He's fantastic. Robin Zucek as well, phenomenal. Defensively, we know what they are, but they just they got the points, and then they took their foot off the gas and allowed Vienna to get back into it. Noah Traore with the great catches over the top was huge. Spidum got an interception on Epler as well. That's important to mention. Jordan Bull looked phenomenal. Schultz as well, number 14. He's having a seriously good breakout year. He looked excellent. The defense for Vienna, though, that was what won them the game. We've talked about this all season. How good they are getting out to the quarterback. They are relentless. They had a multitude of sacks. I think over 5 sacks again.
Right.
So the defensive coordinators need a bunch of credit for that one. A pick by Benjamin Strait as well. 3.5 sacks by Talitza. Like, they were just everywhere. Even Lalo, a nickel corner, has like 3 sacks this year.
Wow,
blitzes. Like, then we see it on the highlights.
There it is.
Yeah, they're just incredible. Vienna, I think they're a real strong contender for the title, and I didn't consider them to be a strong contender. I wasn't bought into the hype, but every game they just kind of seem to be leveling up. We talked about adversity a while back. Same thing. They've overcome the adversity of the Berlin Thunder, who are a good team. They're a very good team. I don't think the 2-2 is entirely reflective, because they've had some tough games too. Sullivan still great, but the rushing game kind of lackluster in this one.
From the chat, Jacob AITH said, I think Berlin dominated 3/4 of the game, but just couldn't finish it. Matt, you kind of alluded to that a little bit there. Vienna's fan base, who is loud as hell, really ended up playing a role in this and kind of turning the momentum back to them, especially in the end there in that 4th quarter when Vienna had to come back. And man, you just touched on it. Vienna is absolutely one of the top 3 championship contenders right now for me, especially given their quarterback situation. Again, being able to have a new quarterback come in here, plug it into this system, and have great success. Like you said, he went for over 300 yards just in 1 week of practice and being able to lead the team to a come from behind victory against a very, very solid Berlin team. The 2-2 record is not so indicative of really how talented this Berlin team is, although they are still struggling. Last year was a problem for them with the run game, and then they got Khalifa in the offseason to hopefully bolster that up a bit, but only about 50 yards on the ground this weekend.
Yeah, it wasn't really very much. They've struggled historically with the run, like you said. Albert has been kind of the tailback they've used most this year, but he didn't play that much. They had Ali come in, who's a former Rookie of the Year guy. And, I've said about it in previous shows that he wasn't getting many of the carries. We expected a bigger role from him. We saw a little bit of that, but then the offensive line seems to kind of disintegrate sometimes when he would get the rock and he'd be battling 5 defensive linemen just straight off the line. It speaks to what we said about the defense of Vienna, but that run protection hasn't really been there the same way that has for the pass protection.
Right. Yeah. And that's just really difficult. I mean, you really got to be able to fire on both cylinders there. In the chat, Marcus says, so good to see tough competition. These nail biters are a lot of fun to watch. And man, I mean, this was a Saturday night game, sort of prime time evening game, and it came down to the end here. And it is just representative of what this league is all about. And the top half of that Eastern Conference, man, these guys, although Rovslaw is, and we'll get into them, man. What are they? What are they?
But I want to talk about Epler as well, though. Like when you have a player do that well, when you've got a quarterback on injury reserve, they're very similar guys. That's gonna, I think there'll be some people pulling either way. We know that some of our friends at Alex are going to be very much on one end of the camp, but Epler's going to be turning some heads. He was very good in that game. You eliminate those fumbles, it might have been a bit more of a distance in score.
Right.
That's a big if. If he didn't turn the ball over is quite a big statement to make. But I think that he'll be a few people will be a little bit like, do we go with Holmes? Do we go with Epler? Epler's a former Mexican League MVP. We know that he's about it.
It's a little bit similar to the Stuttgart Surge situation last year. And real quick, more bounce with the comments here in the comment section. You watch the highlights from the U.S. You guys need to make them at least 10 to 12 minutes in length. 7 minutes is not enough. It's funny you say that. We have an exactly 12-minute highlight. They're called the extended highlights, and they're of every game on the Game Pass, as well as the 23 to 25-minute condensed game where you can watch essentially the entire game with no space in between the plays. So all this stuff you desire, more bounce, is on the Game Pass. See ya on there. Back to the quarterback situation, man. I did talk to Coach Kalaikai last week on the phone, and he said that it's clear Ben Holmes is their guy. So from inside the organization, that is their position. But I think if Epler does stack together a few solid games, people will be talking. It's very similar to what happened last year with the Surge, like I said, where Kenyatta Allen was playing pretty well and Riley Hennessy was coming back from injury, and some people were saying, oh, maybe they stay with Kenyatta Allen. But Jordan Newman and Chris Kalaikai, these are two guys who have coached together and know each other, have a relationship for years, and I think they have a similar mentality. So I would be surprised, even if Epler continues to perform well, that they don't go back with Holmes once he's ready. But who knows what can happen in this league, man. This one ended up 20-25 for the Vienna Vikings. Great one out in the East, man. Fantastic.
Excellent.
Okay, what do we got next? Now, we had a Western Conference, we had an Eastern Conference. Now we're headed to the Central Conference. Two teams that don't get so much love, aren't having the most success, but this game ended up being very, very close and coming down to the end. Helvetic Mercenaries and Barcelona Dragons. Talk to me about this one, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I'll wait until the ending because it was pretty intense. But the offensive line for both teams is still struggling. Aiken was able to get a lot more in the rushing game as we expected. He had 86 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns. So he's still cooking. Anthony Brown is still an elite receiver, potentially. It's just we need to see the offensive line kind of support that offense a lot more. And then on the reverse, Barcelona, same thing. Levi Lewis didn't have a great game. Both of us were quite hot on him coming into the season, but he only had 86 yards and 1 interception, which is it's not really what we expected. But both defenses, we've said this all through the season, both defenses are actually solid for these teams. Helvetic have Kevin Fortes, they got Falk, they got Tim Haney, they got Ken Hike, they got Straker, they got Burry, they got Sherman. They can go on and on and on. They have talent in these positions. They're able to cause turnovers. And they've limited teams to small amounts of points, but the offenses can't necessarily back it up. The Dragons, less so, because the Raiders put a lot of points on them. But they do still have playmakers at the defensive line. Shelton is a great corner. You've got Jared Jackson, who's having a seriously good breakout season. But those field goals.
Matt, sorry, real quick to interrupt you. We got Jamal in the chat, who we know is a diehard Helvetic Mercenaries fan. He says, "Next game, please." Jamal, maybe you just want to mute us for a couple more minutes until we move to the next one. I know this one hurt for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's all this talk, and then it's but the field goals. Tie, 2-point game. They get the field goal. They miss the field goal. They make a defensive stop. They get another chance. And then they miss the field goal again.
They had multiple chances for it. It wasn't in the cards.
I was literally like, this is fate. They've done it. They've got it. I was watching the Euros with my friends in the background while watching this game. I was like, all right, they're going to kick it. They're going to win.
Right.
Surely. Niels Jonkman is a good kicker. He was one of the special teams player of the year nominees last year. And then he shanks it. I put my head in my hands, like, what's going on? Like, two. I can't even fathom it, man.
Cursed for the Mercenaries on this one with the kicking game. This one's interesting, man. Like you talked about, two quarterbacks that are kind of more dual threat guys. Carlton Aiken, man, he's pretty solid, man. I wish that he had a little bit of a better O-line to kind of see what his real full potential would be in this league. Levi Lewis, we've been, of course, like super talented quarterback. And like you said, we were both kind of hot on him and really excited about him coming into the league, but he just has not been able to do much. He does, of course, have some flashes of amazing plays when he's rolling out and throwing across his body or throwing a 50-yard dime on the move, but it's not working out too great for the Dragons there with that move. Mark Wilson says, "I will say Helvetic was the victim of poor scheduling with a week 2 game. The Mercenaries looked great in week 1, but then had a week off." Yeah, having a little bit of that schedule does come into play. What do you think, man?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they look great per se. The offensive line was still showing a lot of holes. The team's been pretty inefficient on third down the entire way. And I agree. I actually am a big Carlton Aiken fan. Although I've said about mobile callbacks not necessarily working, I am a big Carlton Aiken fan. He was on the Dragons last year. Didn't really have a fair shake of it because he was coming in. They had injuries. He was fantastic in Poland. I'd advise you to watch some of his tape when he was over there. But yeah, the offensive line just isn't supporting. He's running for his life out there of some plays. We talked about it last week, and it's been the topic of every week when it comes to the Mercenaries is how can you keep Carlton Aiken safe? Because he's taking a lot of damage. You see, even on these running plays for the touchdown, he's getting hit by 3-4 Dragons at the same time. The scheduling hasn't helped, but they've also got the Dragons twice, which aren't a great team. They've got Milan, which aren't a great team. They have opportunities to pick up wins, but how many more opportunities are they going to get throughout the rest of this year? Maybe one? Maybe on the Milan rematch?
Tough, man. Tough situation there. Just looking at the stats, it is difficult when your quarterback has to run the ball more often than he completes a pass. 18 rushes for Carlton Aiken, just 15 completions. And that's not what you love to see from the quarterback position. It's a tough situation there, but this one ended up coming down to the end with the missed field goals, and Barcelona Dragons squeaked away with a win over the Mercenaries. Kind of the bottom end of the Central Conference. Still ended up being a kind of interesting game, though.
They're always the most fun. The games with the high level are fun, but the games at the lower level, there's a lot of mistakes going on both sides. It just can create stuff like 2 missed field goals in the end of the game. Those are instances where all rules of football are well out of the window. There's a different game now. You know what I mean? I think the drops were actually improved on, I thought, guards, the mercenaries, sorry, like they actually did reel in a lot more passes than they had in previous weeks. So that was an improvement. You can take that into next week
There you go.
as a silver lining, potentially with a bit of momentum. They play. I'm not sure. I can't remember who they play next week, but they can take something from it. The offense clearly improved with getting the ball out quicker for Cartnagan. Wasn't perfect, but it was definitely improved from what we saw against Milan.
That's a great point, and I know we like to have a little bit of fun and laugh a little bit at some of the struggles, but we do have to keep in mind this is a team and a franchise that had a lot of drama, a lot of struggles off the field, and you got to give big kudos to these guys that are going on the field and competing their ass off week in and week out, despite the adversity, whatever's going on off the field and any of that. So we do have to give kudos to these guys and give some spotlight to the improvements and the movement in the right direction. Rome wasn't built in a day. The Helvetic Mercenaries winning season was not built in a day. Jamal, there will be brighter days for the Mercenaries.
Absolutely.
There you go. So we'll move on from that one. We'll move on from that one for our friend Jamal. And move to the next one, which was a very, very interesting game as well. Sort of a must win for both of these teams. Yeah. Wrocław Panthers coming off a week of self-induced drama at the quarterback position, sort of an elective drama that they got themselves into. And then the Frankfurt Galaxy, who had a lot of hype around them coming into the season. Tough opening couple of weeks on their schedule. Started off 0-2. This was an interesting one. Matt, what do we got?
Oh, man. Another one. I just need to take a breath before I explain. I'm going to talk too quickly and then people are going to miss what I'm saying. This was such like you say, a must-win game. No exception. And I feel like the pressure got to both of these teams. Like, that's offensively, both
great way of putting it.
Yeah, like Uribe, 2 interceptions. Looked uncomfortable back there, which makes me think that Duncan wasn't the problem. It was more so within the offensive scheme or whatever. They look so good, and they've just kind of taken a step down every week in terms of their offense, which is incredibly interesting. Fumble. The run game was getting there, but wasn't able to punch through with any touchdowns. And then on the reverse, the Galaxy just had so many sustained drives they were getting, and then they just got greedy and throw a pick. like every time that they would just have a guy open, Michael was open so often in the middle of the field, and it would just be dart right, incomplete, even in the red zone. I was like, run the damn ball, and they just kept passing it. And they try to get tricky with these halfback passes or receiver passes, and both teams are trying to do weird stuff. And it just really felt like both offenses came in and were kind of
Yeah,
that's kind of what I got from it.
That's a really good way of putting it, man. It kind of just, I don't know if it's a little bit jittery or something, but just not really clicking, not really firing. The interesting point, like you said, I think this game was a bit revealing, at least from our perspective right now, that Stephen Duncan was really not the problem in Wrocław, and he was sort of just treated as a scapegoat. Again, we don't know exactly what goes on inside of organizations. And actually, when we talk about the Raiders in a little bit, I'm gonna kind of bite my tongue on some things. But it does seem like, all right, Stephen Duncan left, had a great game with his new team. Wrocław had similar issues, similar problems that they were that we thought that they were blaming on Stephen Duncan, and it just didn't look great for them. Galaxy did sneak away with the win. Marcus in the chat says their play is basically a coin toss between good/bad. Yeah, there's not so much consistency.
I would go even further and say every play is good or bad. You're either getting Paul Lenhart had a very good game. We haven't seen much of him. I'm not sure if he's been on just a bit banged up, but he looked really good over the middle. He's an aggressive slot that can really extend plays, and he will fight for every yard that he can get. And they had him a few times over those middle of the drives. And then, like I said, next play, deep throw, pick. Or in the red zone, they threw that. Lenhart did throw a pick, I'm pretty sure, or someone threw a pick in the red zone to back to that. It was just every play was just, what's going on? But to be fair, I'm saying how bad the offense was. defensively on both sides were fantastic. Like AJ Wetland's 17 tackles is incredible.
Yeah.
And then they had a couple sacks defensively. Matt Cole had an okay game receiving, but Hugo Dyrol, the Swedish linebacker, he had 14 tackles. Daniel Ngagwe had 12 tackles and half a sack. He's one of the best nickel defenders in the league. A-Chain Bruins got tackled. Like, there was a lot to love defensively. And then offensively, it kind of seems like both teams were shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. In the chat here, Ricardo Oliveira says, sad to see such a bad QB with good wide receiver core. What do you think of that? What is your response to that comment on that?
I wouldn't say Uribe's a bad quarterback because he has had a lot of success in Europe, and the receiver core is excellent. You know, you've got Gatspa, who is phenomenal. You've got Matt Cole, who's a former NFL receiver. You've got Adams, who stretches out as a running back. He plays a lot of receiver. You've got Beto Moreno, who's a great tight end. It just seems like, Landa is a great offensive coordinator, but they were pretty inefficient on third down. They got a lot of total yards, but never really felt like they got moving. They threw they're just a touch over 50%. I know what he means, but I kind of think there might be a little bit more going into it. We see how good Duncan was,
right?
And we saw how good he was in the previous weeks. And like I said, the offense has kind of been steadily decreasing. So not really sure what's going on in Vojslav, but I wouldn't say that Uribe's a bad quarterback per se, although he does have an elite receiver core. It's kind of a difficult situation to navigate.
Right. I mean, we've seen now two quarterbacks that we know have talents, of what Uri did in the Mexican League. And we've seen the talent that Stephen Duncan has, whether it is in week one of his stint with the Panthers or this past weekend with the Bravos. But yeah, man, what is it? Is it the scheme? Is the offensive scheme? Is the offensive line play?
I really don't know, because Keanu Ebanks is one of the best left tackles in the league. And they got Otavio Moram, who is great in space. He's aggressive. He's a nasty offensive lineman, which is what you want. But I feel like they're playing him a right tackle and they should be playing him an inside. Maybe that's just me being picky. But, like I'm seeing in the comments, no Sandro either.
Right.
He's been kind of spotty on his return to Europe. He's been out with injuries. He had a season-ending injury last season. He moved to Frankfurt. It was a big, big deal. And we haven't seen him really play that much. Fishback took all the really handoffs. He was a great running back.
Yep. I think that's a good point there. Interesting that, that Platzkummer hasn't been able to kind of come back here, and obviously coming off the big injury, and he's a sort of a European favorite, and people are really anticipating him getting on the field and kind of becoming another big face of the league, but we've yet to be able to see that. Hopefully, as some more time goes on and he feels a little bit more comfortable, we'll get some of those flashes of old Sandro. But speaking of running backs, Brzozowski, the homegrown of the year from last year, still putting up great numbers, 117 yards on 25 carries. We'll take it. It's interesting to see the workload split between Brzozowski and Adams. I thought it would be a little bit more evenly split, but it's still all Brzozowski.
Yeah, I agree. And he hasn't scored yet.
He hasn't scored a touchdown.
Really weird. Like, he's had this many carries, but when it comes to red zone, they're just not giving him the ball.
Yeah.
I don't really get it. I agree, though. I expected a lot more of a 50-50 split.
Interesting. Yeah, and we see Adams getting a little more involved in the passing game and kind of out of the backfield stuff. But there we see it, 10-20. The must win for both games, for both teams, tilted in favor of Frankfurt. They finally got their first win. We had Frankfurt at 7 or 8 in our power rankings last week, and they are just a team that has had to open up the season against a lot of good teams, and now they're on the board with a W. We'll see if they can't continue it going on. Now, the next one, another Central Conference, back to the Central Conference. We'll say the most lackluster game of the week in terms of nail-biting excitement, but there was a lot of offensive firepower from the Stuttgart Surge. I was there at this game filming on the sideline, so I had a nice little firsthand to all this. But Matt, what was your perspective watching on Game Pass?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we came into ELF Live, we said about 99% to 1%, and I kind of feel like that was reflective of how the where the game was going. When a backup quarterback comes in, who was a good backup, don't get me wrong, but he gets 3 touchdowns on a starting defense of Milan. Milan, they're without an A. They've had struggles offensively all year. Calderon's getting more of the ball, which I love to see because he deserves more of the ball, and they finally have found a way to get him involved in the passing game. But yeah, man, like the surge just look incredible. Gaia is just making steps up every single season. Like he came in as 19? I think he came into the league at, and he had a really good year, was one of the Rookie of the Year contenders. And then he went to the Centurions, and he came back to the Surge, and he just leveled up every year. And I think he could be someone we see with 1,000 yards. And that would be an incredible story to have someone coming from the start to now and have that much of a progression, because he looks so good this game.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And just the Surge were just firing on all cylinders. To me, Riley Hennessy is in the conversation of MVP candidate for the league. I think he's at 11 or 12 touchdowns, no interceptions, playing like an absolute veteran. I mean, you just see him in the pocket. He's so poised. He's so calm. He's so comfortable. Makes a lot of good decisions. I think he threw 4 touchdown passes in the first half. Of course, the backup quarterback Heydrich came in and went 9 for 12 with 155 yards and 3 touchdowns himself. I mean, in the thing that Coach Newman said after the game to the team that he was most proud of is that it doesn't matter who comes on the field. We've got depth at all positions, and that everybody is constantly competing on that roster to get playing time. We had a couple other running backs come in. Libano came in and had a solid day, 8 carries for 52 yards just in the second half. And so a couple other guys getting a little bit of shine there for the Surge. It was exciting to see for those guys. But yeah, this one was just one-sided, lopsided. Fun game for the Surge, not so much for the Seamen. Although I do have to say the Seamen were flying around on defense, man, especially in the first half. The Surge did struggle to run the ball against the Seamen's defense. Zachary Blair just flying all over the place, man. There was a couple hits and just a couple contacts that were incredibly loud. And get up and say, oh, yeah, that's Blair again, just sideline to sideline. So we got to give him a shout out, of course.
Yeah, he's so good. I remember I messaged Riley like after the game. I was like, oh, you what, 10-0 in terms of touchdowns? He's like, no, we're 3-0, like as a team.
Yeah,
like, okay, I see what you mean. Like, he gave praise as well to like his receiver core and stuff like that. So I can, speaks to the level of camaraderie and just how bonded they are as a team, that he would be like, nah, it's not about me having this MVP like season. It's about us winning as a team. And I love that.
Exactly. And the Surge, they did get Hazleton Jr. over here, a new American for a while Daryl Stewart Jr. is out. But the Surge are really just their wide receiver core from their Europeans is just so stacked. You almost don't even miss it right now. There we see the final score, 9-55. That very cool picture there, Mitch Fettig on the graphic. That's an awesome one. And so we will move on from our least interesting game of the weekend, the one and only game this weekend that wasn't an absolute thriller. Speaking of thriller, Matt, this one might have been the game of the week, probably in contention so far for one of the games of the year. Highly anticipated. Munich Ravens, the Tyrol Raiders. Raiders bringing in a new quarterback, their third quarterback, N'Kosi Perry. Played at the University of Miami, the U. Coming over here to Europe. This one was fascinating. Talk to me, Matt.
Yeah, fascinating. Good way to put it. Both teams struggled a little bit on third downs. 4 for 13 for the Ravens, 3 from 13 on the Raiders side. But I'll get to the final drive in a minute because that needs its own breakdown. Chad was fine, but didn't really light the world on fire. And N'Kosi Perry had flashes. We knew what he is. The consistency was something that we highlighted as on his pre-game, tool set of just, is he going to be as consistent as he was with Miami? Because he was pretty inaccurate and threw a few picks. He did throw a pick, which was a confusing one. But then Tommy Iowa was back. He's been involved in the receiving game a lot more. That was good to see. So we really had both offenses really at full strength. Because N'Kosi Perry is a phenomenal quarterback, don't get me wrong. But Bonatti, he had 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's one of the best running backs in the league this year. Chafin is dropping a few balls, but he's still making those incredible, like,
It's
clutch plays.
crazy, man.
Like, I don't get it. Like,
Crazy. Like the most difficult, insane, clutch, high point catches in between 3 defenders, pulls it in, but then some of the easier ones just
just right out of hands. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
concentration thing. I'm not so sure. I don't know. But defensively, both were on fire. Both caused turnovers. Both were they bent and then they broke a little bit at some points. But that last drive, it's unfathomable how you can give up 3 fourth downs in one drive.
Yeah.
Like,
That's just tough. Like Kendall's got to be pretty upset about that one, especially him being the defensive guy there. I mean, because they had their opportunities to just shut it down.
yeah, they had 3 of them. Like, could have ended. And then it speaks to Chafin. Chafin got, I think, 2 of them, maybe even all 3. And he might have even got all 3 of them. So
Yeah.
he's a very clutch receiver. That's undoubtable. But, like, defensively, man, that can't happen. You know, you've got the weapons. These are the weapons that you have. You know, you've got Nasri. You've got a great pass rush. You've got playmakers like Nitsander and like Darius St. Robinson. But the final play, don't put a DB on the receiver that's been killing you all drive. You allow him to have a free release inside for an easy slant or seam down the middle of the field for a touchdown.
Right.
It was a confusing drive to watch defensively on Munich's standpoint. I don't really know what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what happened either, man. The Cozy Perrion and Darren Chafin happened apparently, and I like we said it when they signed Perry last week that he was gonna probably be either like a sort of a boom or bust quarterback, just based off of what is being successful so far in the ELF. And this week it was a little bit of a boom. Like he brought them to this big win. And I kind of, on social media a couple weeks ago, when they did release their quarterback, I put out a tweet, and it actually ended up getting like quite a bit of traction. And basically I was sort of criticizing the Raiders organization for moving through quarterbacks so fast and how it looks to potential future players. But it looks like, at least from what happened this week, that the Raiders might have found their guy, might have found what they're looking for. Us guys who are analysts and talk about the game, we're it's our job to criticize, but really it's all about the man in the arena, the teams and the guys, the coaches, and the staffs that put these rosters together and players. So I do got to give a little bit of kudos to the Raiders for what seems to be maybe finding their guy, maybe finding what they're looking for. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he could be their guy. He looked comfortable for a guy that's just coming off like a week.
I think he was there for like 4 days or 5 days.
Exactly. Like, completely different. Like, this is first time in Europe. From Miami to Innsbruck is extremely different.
That's a culture shock.
That's a hell of a culture shock. So for him to come in and look quite comfortable, like not all points, but looked pretty good. His offensive line is hit and miss. He took a few hits back there in the backfield, but he still pulled out the win against a team that we considered as contenders at the start of the year. Whether or not they're contenders now is a different story. Matt, he still did a very good job.
Let me ask you that, because in the chat right here, Mark Wilson says, I don't get the hype over Munich. In my opinion, they're a mediocre team. We were bubbling all over them coming into the preseason and coming into the season. What is at this point in the season, what is your analysis of the Munich Ravens? Who are they and how good are they?
I think the big difference is they've went from an offensive-minded head coach of John Shoup. They went to a defensive-minded coach of Ellison. And they're both great coaches in their own right. I don't want to get twisted. But that's a big change-up. I don't think that can go understated. And then on their offense, they've lacked, I think, an elite second receiver. Right. And they've also lacked an elite American receiver. I don't think John Cole is a top 10 American receiver in this league. We didn't see him in this game. So they're without American in this game. Tomo Iowa was leading the team with this receptions in these games, and he's the running back, and he's also coming off a few weeks of injuries.
Sure.
Marvin Rush is a great receiver. He's an all-star. I think that he is a number 2, but he's not been as good as he was last year. Like, he's had those flashes. He got 59 yards and a touchdown in this game. But last year, they had a lot more going on with Castle, and he really stretched the field out and gave these other receivers opportunities. The offensive line is not being what we expected that to be formidable, like a unit that no one could get through.
Yeah, man, they got talked about a lot.
But people can get through it.
Yeah.
Serge got through it a lot. like
Right.
in week one. So I think that's the big thing is they're all hype, but then they haven't quite lived up to it. And I think the big reason is the loss of Markel. You lose a triple crown winner, and they haven't got someone to fill in those shoes. And I think that's the biggest part. The offense looks a lot more reduced.
It's tough when you have the ghost of just an elite player, whether it be previously for the Raiders, the ghost of Sean Shelton, or now possibly for the Ravens, the ghost of Markel Castle. In the chat right now, we've got the king himself, Glenn Tunga.
There we go.
Man, are you sore today or what, Glenn? I hope you're feeling all right. Way to go, man.
Good job, Glenn.
Yeah, this one. But then just going back to that last drive, N'Kosi Perry and Chafin, just how damn clutch was that with those fourth down conversions to come from behind. And what a debut. N'Kosi Perry had, I saw some of his interview after the game, and he was just like, what an opening game for my European career. This was awesome. I never had a football environment like that. And so this one was awesome for the league, tough for the Ravens, great for the Raiders. It's interesting. We thought probably before the season that the Central Conference, it was going to be a competition between the Ravens and the Surge for that top spot. Right now, it's looking like maybe it's a competition between the Ravens and the Raiders for that second spot.
Yeah.
Who
would have thought? No, me. I didn't think that was going to happen.
I know, man. This is everything. There's a lot of surprises in this league. Glenn says, I appreciate you guys. Not going to lie, I'm tired. You should be, bro. Get in the ice bath, hit the sauna or something, Glenn.
For sure.
Yeah. And then just a couple more from the chat. Marcus says everyone's opinion is going to drop for the Ravens when they get spanked in Nuremberg this weekend. They've got a huge one against the Surge in Nuremberg. I think there's already 10,000. There should be about 10,000 people there. So, yeah, that one ended up just being a thriller. Raiders come out on top 29-26. Now, finally, our last game of the weekends, the winless Prague Lions taking on our director, producer, Maxie, his team, the Hamburg Sea Devils. What we got here, Matt?
I mean, another one I've got to take a breath about. I feel like I do this every time. Prague, without a win in the ELF, unless like a real one, they had that win with the folding of teams last season, but they've not won a game. And it looks like this might have been a one. Shout out to Parker Rogers, my friend, who's a big fan of them over in Chicago. Yeah. But he was so excited to see them go up, and then they just lost it.
Like, yeah, bro. What? Man,
they crumbled. They crumbled. They were poor offensively again. They kind of had a little bit going. Tyrese Johnson-Fisher had a few carries. He looked good in his return. And then the offensive line still poor. Lyle's only got 75 yards and an interception. It says here on the stats we're looking at 0 for 10 on third down, which is just like
abysmal.
Yikes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Defensively, a couple plays. Brooks is still an elite defensive player for that team. A couple of turnovers and interceptions. They had that fumble that went for a touchdown. Like they had everything that they could have wanted, and they lost. Like they had it all, but
they just only
Hamburg.
These stats correct, 127 yards of total offense.
I wouldn't be surprised. It kind of felt like they were just all defense. They had a few offensive plays, but
defense and the special teams kind of putting them down. Yeah, Maxie, our director, says yes, it is correct. But Matt, I want to ask you, what do you make of Juvarian Smith? He went 29 for 47, 372 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. What do you make of him as a quarterback? He's got a little bit of flashes of just phenomenal, and then just what the hell was that?
Juvarian Smith is the hardest quarterback I've ever had to evaluate in Europe.
Okay.
So he, like you said, he will have instances where he will scramble around, use his mobility, and then will just throw a 70-yard bomb. The receiver, I'm blank on his name, you might remember it, but he had the 8th highest receiving game in ELF history. Which is insane.
Uh-huh.
Anyway,
that's Neugebauer.
I was going to say, I'm going to butcher the German names. So, he was phenomenal. But Juvarian, and then he'll have a play where he's running around and he keeps his eyes down and he doesn't try and find a player to get sacked. Like, I've said in week 1, I don't know what to think of him. I said in week 2, I don't know what to think of him. I said in week 3, I still don't know what to think of him. He's like JJ McCarthy in just that you need to watch like 7 or 8 games worth of tape to really get what he's about. He threw the ball 47 times in this game. And I still don't feel like I have enough tape to make an accurate
That's right.
evaluation, which is insane. It was a big stark contrast to how they usually run. They're usually a lot more of a running team with Hamadi and Hart and Canido. Neither of them really got started. They both had under 30 yards. They went all out for the pass, boom or bust pass, and we saw kind of a little bit of both, it seems, at the same time. 3 touchdowns. He had a great game, but it's just those crazy flashes. We saw the fumble, we see the big play there by Alexander. What a play by him.
Yeah.
He's a player that deserves a lot more recognition for how good he's doing.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's hilarious that he threw the ball 47 times. You still feel like you can't really get a read. You can't really make a decision. Hopefully by the end of the year, you'll be able to get a strong analysis of Javarian Smith, but he did lead his team to victory, come from behind victory this weekend. I wonder, do you think this game, of course, it ended up being like pretty close. It was competitive. Is this Prague taking steps in the right direction, or is this Hamburg taking steps in the wrong direction?
That's a great question. I mean, we kind of saw it was close in their first game that they matched up with, but I think Prague did look improved, and this was kind of the Prague that I expected to see at the start of the year. A good rushing game. We saw Tyrese Johnson-Fisher was signed before the year, but then they signed Mara Zero, and then they've gone back to Tyrese. Right. So this is kind of why I expected them to be a lot more run heavy, not as much pass, and a good defense. That's what I expected. I expected them to be in more close games around the middle of the pack, but I think it's more of Hamburg playing better and Prague still not being able to find a win in the ELF. I think that is impactful for the higher ups, the coaches or whoever's involved with that part of the team. We have never won a football game in the ELF on the field. Yeah. Like this, that must be some crazy pressure to have on the players, on the coaches, and the team staff. And this kind of felt like one of the chances they had. And they just kind of let it slip through sand like that, through their fingers. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah. And that's definitely got to be a big pressure and sort of in the back of the mind. This is another team, just like I said, with the Mercenaries, though. I personally feel like they're making steps in the right direction, and they're gonna get that win. They're gonna get that first win. I mean, so much goes into building a football team and finding success, and especially, a lot of these maybe German teams or a team like Paris that has some more experienced homegrown talents. That Prague has got some work to do, but taking steps in the right direction, man.
Yeah, I mean, there are some players in the Czech league that I think could fill into this team and do a seriously good job. But it's just they lack on the offensive line. That's still such a big thing for them. They haven't reinforced it. And that's going to be the question mark going forward is realistically, what teams can they beat in that conference? They have such hard teams. They got the Vikings, they got the Thunder, who were tough. They got Wrocław, who were tough. The Enthroners matchup is going to be incredibly interesting because one of them is going to have to win.
Yeah.
And I kind of do feel like that could be the way that they get their win. I feel like that will be one that we're looking at with.
That will end up being similar, hopefully, in excitement to the Mercenaries Dragons game that we had this week. Could be similar like that. And we had a chat in here that I wanted to see, but we can't see it now. It went up a little bit. It was somebody saying that I wish the X League in Japan would do the marketing and all of the media work that the ELF does. It's a shout out to our media team and our guy, Maxie Zimmer, who does a lot of this stuff here. Way to go, guys. Good stuff on all the marketing. And there we see, there's some beautiful marketing right there. Look at that graphic with a gorgeous picture.
That's so
and the
good.
Final score, 17-27. Whoa, Matt. Whoa, man. That's a lot of good damn football we had this weekend.
I absolutely agree.
Just what was your favorite game?
My favorite game, it's a tough one. I'm gonna go with Ryan and Paris, just because of the consequential results and just it was just excitement everywhere. Turnovers, big plays. It was a chess match.
Yeah.
And then the ending it blew my mind. There was a lot that went into that game, so that'd probably be my favorite one. But what about you?
Yeah, I love that. I love the Rhine and Paris matchup. So good. I'm gonna go with the Ravens Raiders. Came down to the end as well. Fascinating to see a new quarterback come in the league, game-winning drive. I'm just like really just bias also against that or towards that stadium. I love that atmosphere. I think it's one of the best atmospheres for European football right there in the Alps. They had a good rowdy fan base at the game and ended up getting them the home win. So I think that was my favorite one of the week, man.
Very respectable.
There we go. Guys, let's take, just before we go, a look at our standings here. Look at that. Western Conference, Madrid Bravos sitting at the top. We got 3 unbeaten teams left.
Yes,
Vienna and Stuttgart, which I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that makes sense. I would have expected that before the season. And then the Madrid Bravos, which I'm not sure how many people would have thought that they'd be sitting at 3-0 right now, especially with the Rhine Fire being one of their first 3 games. What's your biggest surprise in the standings right now, Matt?
I think it's got to be Galaxy, right? I mean, they're still rooted at 5th in that conference. They're still below Hamburg. They're below Madrid. They're below Paris and Fire. Like, these are teams we thought they might be competing with or doing a lot better. I don't think anyone would have said that the Hamburg Sea Devils, which I didn't consider as an elite team, would be higher than the Galaxy. And that might even be quite an interesting matchup in game.
True.
I wouldn't have believed that in the preseason.
Yeah. That's a wild one, man. Yeah, the Galaxy at 1-3 sitting at 5th. For me, I'm a little bit, it's not crazy, but it's a little bit surprising. Munich Ravens just sitting right in the middle. I mean, they're 2-2 right next to the Barcelona Dragons in the Central Conference. That's kind of interesting. And then the Wrocław Panthers at 1-3. This is a team that we talked about. I think I even talked about them as being possibly an underrated squad coming into the season, and they just haven't been able to get these wins. Of course, they've had to play. I mean, their schedule is just abysmal. It's very, very difficult. But I think the Wrocław Panthers are a surprise for me. And then in the chat here, Ulti says, give us more fantasy content, please. We need some points and boom shots from our teams. We'll have something on Thursday for you. Maxie, can you give us that info again? I missed the second half of it. Something about Thursday. Yes. So on Thursday, you'll have some info and stuff and points for fantasy, I believe. And so you can set your teams. And Thursday is fantasy day. There we go. Thursday is going to be fantasy day. Okay, we got it. Thursday is fantasy day. And I recommend you put Glenn Tunga on your fantasy team as he sits here in the chat with us.
Every week.
He's recovering from the game. Matt, it's a good one, man.
As always.
There we go. Fantastic. Thanks so much, guys, for everyone in the chat. Matt, I love your expertise, man. We could talk ELF ball all day. Absolutely. And we'll keep doing it twice a week.
For sure. Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you on Thursday.
See you about.